Hello everyone, I'm Jonathan Burns and thank you for joining me on Tuesday Tips, practical tips from Scripture. It has been some time since I have been able to be with you, but I am glad that I am with you today, and I want to remind you of who our program sponsors are as we go forward. Don't forget, you can search out the Jurong Church of Christ. You can go to Facebook and search Jurong Church of Christ, and there you can find all sorts of information, or you can even go to their website at jurongcoc.org, and there you'll find all sorts of things that you might want to have and you might want to seek out. You can go visit my website at digitalmissionwork.com, and there you will find all sorts of resources. The newest thing we have on our site is all sorts of Bible maps. They are free. You can go and download them, print them off, use them in your classrooms, use them in all sorts of different ways so that you can teach, not only in adult classes, but children classes, that the things we read about in the Bible, they were real, and we can find them on maps together. We are studying today back in the Old Testament, and we are in the Psalms in Tuesday Tips, practical tips from Scripture, errors refuted in the Psalms. Now what we're trying to do is we're trying to take the book of Psalms and all 150 chapters, and we're trying to find ways and things that we can learn from and things that will help us. We have three that we're going to look at today. We're going to look at atheism versus God, heaven versus hell, and ideas versus God. And hopefully what becomes of you and I as we go through this is we are able to see that God reigns, God has rule, and God is true, and we can follow Him. Now let's talk about atheism for just a minute, and let's put that against God and use the book of Psalms to help us understand some creative language, inspired language, that shows us that God is true. Now, in the United States, there is a production, a magazine called Time Magazine. And in one of the episodes in years gone by, they asked this question. It was in big red letters. Is God dead? Now, as we survey our entire world, and as we see all sorts of things together, we might have noticed that our world as a whole is losing its view on who God is. And it seems self-promotion is rising up. Governmental overreach or governmental support is rising up. Now, I'm certainly not talking bad about governments, but a dependence on earth and humanity has become the design. The psalmist talks about some of these things, and in one of those occasions, in Psalm 14:1 and Psalm 53:1, we read these words. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They have done abominable works. There is none who does good. After saying, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God, they are corrupt, 53:1. And have done abominable iniquity. There is none who does good. What's the idea? There are many living today, living however they want to, with whomever they want to, in whatever way they want to, and it's easy for them to say, there is no God. You see, for many, God is seen as a conflict. God tells me I'm wrong. God tells me I can't live the way I want to. God tells me I can't be who I am. In the United States, we'll hear this phrase, I was born that way. Unfortunately, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. Now, concerning atheism versus God, you can go read Psalm 19 and Psalm 139, and there you will be able to find a number of things that will show you that God is true. And you can do some study and find when atheism is put against God, there is a God. Let's go in the second place and let's talk about heaven and hell. Now, I know that's not a topic that's comfortable for many, and I agree with you. I don't like one of the locations. But just because I don't like it does not mean it's false. In Psalm 9:17, we read these words. The wicked shall be turned into hell, and all the nations that forget God. Psalm 1:6, for the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish. It is true that there are two different ways to live. There is the righteous way, and there is the wicked or ungodly way. The righteous way seeks to follow after God. Now, that does not mean people who serve God are perfect. Sometimes I believe in our world and even in the culture of which I live, people look at Christians and expect them to be perfect. Now, certainly we should live right. But 1 John 1:7 says the blood of Christ continually cleanses us from all sin. In other words, when we fail, we have someone to forgive us of our failures. Being a Christian does not equate to perfection. However, there are two ways: righteousness, right doing, and wickedness or ungodly. Those who are righteous will be with God for eternity, and those who are wicked, they will be cast away from God. The psalmist mentions the godly and the ungodly, and those who will be with God and those who will not be with God. Psalm 116 is a depiction that helps us understand heaven and hell are discussed. And you can read Psalm 116 and find that you can be faithful to God. Let's talk about some ideas. Ideas versus God. So we have in our study together today, atheism versus God, heaven versus hell, and ideas versus God. I want to give you an earthly idea. It's Calvinism. It's defined many times with 5 tenets or 5 main points: hereditary depravity, unconditional election, limited atonement, irresistible grace, and perseverance of all the saints. Now, in that occasion, what many say is there's nothing you can do to be saved. God has already chose who will be saved. It has to do with your family. It has to do with your culture, with your nation, with your people. But God's already chosen. If you're going to be lost, you'll be lost. Nothing you can do about it. Going to be saved, you're going to be saved. Nothing you can do about it. Let me ask you this. If you're going to be lost, why try to follow Jesus? If you're going to be saved, no matter what, why try to live a righteous life? You see, already we've found a conflict in that particular scene. But the psalmist refutes some of these doctrines, ideas versus God. Psalm 139:14, I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and my soul knows very well. The psalmist says, you know who I was, not that you have instituted me to be condemned. You can go read Psalm 78 as well as the rest of the Psalms. Go read the Psalms of David. And you will find that David asked to be purged from his sins because he knew he needed to be right with God. If David, ladies and gentlemen, in the Old Testament, was going to be saved no matter what or lost no matter what, why would he ask God to purge him from his sins? You see, as we open up our study back on Tuesday tips, atheism versus God, heaven versus hell, ideas versus God, here's the truth. God stands above them all. So in part 1 of a 2-part series, Errors Refuted in the Psalms, we find that God reigns supreme. Go read the Psalms. Study up. We'll be back in it next week. I want to remind you today of who is the sponsor of our program. It is the Jurong Church of Christ. Now you can search them on Facebook, or you can go to their website, jurongcoc.org, and there you can find more about you can go visiting them. I'm glad you're with me today, and I hope next week you'll join me for Tuesday Tips, practical tips from Scripture.